finally took the roof off our house in Stowe, and I was looking out over the expanse of floor with walls up and nothing over it. I was like, oh my God, I made a huge mistake. We had a house that was entirely livable, and now I just took the top completely off of it. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Deputy Editor Matt Milham.
What's up?
Digital brand badass Rob Wasak.
Hey guys.
And producer Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
Well, it's nice to see all you gentlemen on this bright early morning. For those of you listening, we're recording a little earlier in the day, hoping to stay out of the web rush hour. So hopefully the video feed will be a little smoother and our audio will sound a little better. So Good to be hanging out with you guys this morning.
It's good to see you guys too. It's a little early. I'm not fully coffeeed up yet.
Yeah, I've been sucking down some myself.
Yeah.
So what have you been doing, Matt? You've been working on the house? You've been working on projects for the magazine? What's going on?
Yeah, mostly working on a project for a magazine right now. Trying to repoint my disaster of a chimney. So that's been fun, slow going. The people who I don't know if it was repointed like this. I have gone pretty deep on some of the joints. They used a very hard mortar and the brick is very soft. So it's very difficult to keep the stuff from spalling. So I've been trying a bunch of different techniques to try to come out with a good result. And I've finally, I think, figured out a pretty decent method, although it's not my preferred way. It's not what I would do if it were built right to begin with.
So this is an excuse to buy some new tools, am I right?
It has been, yep. I mean, I had stuff that I would normally use, but normally I wouldn't be using a grinder, but I found that that's pretty much the only way I can go to really limit the damage to the bricks.
You have some kind of dust collecting shroud on this, correct? Is it keeping the mess down somewhat?
It is amazing. I mean, while I'm doing this, I'm taking pictures of myself. I have a camera set up on a tripod up on the roof, and you go back and you can't even see any dust. It's like, you're looking back and it's like, am I really doing anything? People are going to be like, he's not really cutting. But really, that's only on the first cut. Like if you do more than one, if you go back into that cut, then it'll start to shoot dust out the front of it. But
what kind of
how are you doing the? Go ahead, Rob.
I was just saying, what kind of attachment is it?
It's just this it's like a Lexan and metal shroud that basically has like a pickup for a vacuum on it, and I just have it hooked up to a little battery operated. I don't even think it's a HEPA vacuum, but it's got a good filter. There's no dust coming out of it. And I mean, it's got like a little guide on it so that you can kind of track along. And the brand, I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head, but it's just some third party. It's not one of the major brands or anything like that. I think it was something made in China, and it works fantastic.
Cool.
Awesome. What have you been doing, Rob? I briefly caught an email that's not involving projects, but you wanted to...
the past few times you've asked me on, and this is just sort of a product of what spring is like around my house. I felt guilty because I'm like, oh man, you guys are doing all these big projects and I'm not doing anything. Well, that's not true. I'm just I've spent the past several weekends transplanting giant plants around my entire property, but I've been working on this house for 18 years, and every year, all spring and all fall, I'm killing myself doing projects. And I'm like, you know what? My daughter's 14 years old. She's only been hanging out here for a few more years. I got to start doing some more fun projects around here. So we just picked up some kayaks last week, and we've been just a couple of days a week just going out on the river right behind our house. And but the next project, because the kayaks don't have a home and they're really nice and we don't want to put them on the outdoor rack, is I got to figure out how to build a lift system in my shed to get them out of the way.
I thought you were going to say you're going to build a funicular from the river up to the back of your house.
If it wasn't the wetlands and I was allowed to build in that property, I would. But yeah, in fact, I'd love to have a shed down by the river, but we have our whole lower yard is all wetlands, so we're not supposed to even put fence posts in down there. I mean, I'm sure nobody would notice if I put a little little tiny shed in the corner. But I just like these things are beautiful little boats. So I want to keep them nice and clean in my shed up at the house.
So are they single person kayaks or are they two people? Or?
Yeah. So when my daughter was little, we had a canoe, and she wants her independence. So we went out and, got a couple of individual kayaks, and they only weigh like 35 pounds each. I got them at Dick's. Did a really interesting curbside pickup where you text them and then they just drop them in the back of your pickup truck when you get there.
Mm-hmm.
Are they plastic or are they fiberglass?
They're some kind of plastic, like a polyethylene maybe or something like that. But they're the kind that are made in two halves and sort of fused together, not the heavier roto molded ones. So they're nice.
What have you been doing, Jeff? Have you dug into your tractor yet? This is one thing that's been really troubling me.
Yeah, well, as far as the tractor goes, I'm an idiot. Just because it's one of those things is like, you have to ask the right questions. So, you Google transmission problems, you get answers on transmission problems, completely forgetting that this tractor has a drive belt. My old tractor was a direct drive, so it's just a belt.
Ah, what a wonderful discovery.
Yeah. I mean, I felt good being stupid, but,
So did you have to replace it or did you have to tighten it?
Just a new belt, $20 in half an hour and off and running.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So what about the oven?
Haven't really worked on that at all. Yes.
I thought of another solution for you with regard to that. You need a small hair dryer, and you need to disconnect the heat setting, and you need to plug it in every time you use the range and duct tape it to the side of the oven to blow across that control panel.
Yeah. That'd be perfect.
And attractive.
Yes.
Well, I help Liam.
I'm not using my hair dryer now, so.
I help Liam build the what amounts to the ladder that gets to his loft bed. It's 3 boxes. One box is approximately 17 inches tall, 20 inches wide. One box is approximately 34 inches tall and 28 inches wide. And then there's another box that fits on top of that big box. So it's a series of 3 boxes. We'll put some photographs on the page. And that's how he gets up in his loft bed. And you'd be amazed at how much work it is to make plywood boxes in my life. And so I get this thing all built on the deck, and it's nearly 3 sheets of plywood. It's like 2 1/3 sheets of plywood collectively, and I screwed it all together so it would look nice. And then, and this thing's heavy, so I enlist the whole family to carry it through the door. It just barely fits. We get to Liam's door, and we turn it on its side, thinking it's going to go through the door. Well, the door isn't even 30 inches. I should have measured it probably. And of course, it wouldn't fit. And then it's like before lunchtime, and I'm getting a little wigged out. So I was like, well, we'll just take out the window sash, and we'll lift this thing through the window.
Oh.
And I got the family convinced that was a good idea somehow. And then I was like, well, if I get this thing through the window upright, am I going to be able to turn it so it sits that's in its correct orientation? And the answer is no. So I had to unscrew it all and take it through the door in parts and then put it back together in the room, which wasn't exactly terrible, but it wasn't part of my plan either. But it was a good bonding experience for the whole family.
Would they agree with you on that?
Probably not.
Emancipation paperwork is in the mail.
So we heard from some listeners, and you guys recall I asked for suggestions about what to do with my CD collection, right? I'm tired of moving these things around. I don't use them a lot, but there's some sentimental value, and, I'm of a certain age, so there's some potential that, I'll be able to show in future generations this anachronistic technology. But anyway, Andy had a suggestion, and not the Andy we know, but this other Andy. Patrick, if you want to listen to your CDs without ads and with the convenience of selecting them on your phone, this is how you can easily accomplish it. Buy a Synology DS218 Plus network attached storage drive. Put a hard drive in it of some size. set up a Plex as a service on it. You can then connect all the computers in your house to see the storage on it, kind of like a wireless thumb drive. Rip the CDs you have on a computer with the CD drive using iTunes or Fubar or something, copy them over to Synology. You'll be able to play them on the Plex app on your phone. Now, so I don't know what most people would describe as easily accomplishing something, but I'm thinking maybe this is not what I would describe as easily accomplished. So, Andy, thanks for that suggestion.
Yeah, there's about 5 things I need to look up in that. I have no idea what he's talking about.
Well, not to mention that Patrick's house is so small that it's not like he needs remote access to everything in the house. He can probably just put it on one device in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
Rob, I could just put them in a boombox and listen to them anywhere on the property. Andy continues here. Though I know the discussion hasn't happened in a while, I am ridiculously overtrucked. As I'm barely an amateur remodeler, I just own some rental properties. I bought a used ambulance at an auction for $6,700.
Cool.
It's basically an F450 with an aluminum box that has outlets and a breaker panel in it. It's awesome.
It sounds awesome.
Thanks for everything you guys do on the podcast. I've managed to make most of the advice in some way or another, maintaining 3 historic properties. Even Matt's weird gazebo roof adventure someone had made something similar in the back corner of one of my lots. That might be the best description of your project I've ever heard, Matt.
Yep. I wish I could get back to it. I actually started to work on the cap 2 weekends ago, and there's just so much pollen. Like, it was dangerous. I got up there and I almost fell off of it. So I stopped.
I think that's wise. So you have all the cedar shingles on it?
Yeah, all the cedar shingles are on it. The only thing is the cap, and I've, was mocking up different options to kind of see what it would look like. And I was doing these mock-ups actually in place to, get like a real sense, because none of the roof planes are exactly the same pitch because it's such an odd shaped structure. And so getting a cap that, kind of like doesn't make it look even wonkier is a little difficult.
It's going to look like a witch's hat, right?
It's going to look, probably something like that, like the Sorting Hat or something like that from Harry Potter.
What house would you be in, Matt?
I have no idea.
We also heard from Doug, who we've heard from in the past, and he writes in on the subject of sprung dance floors. This is a conversation we had with Kylie about floors that are meant to be somewhat impact reducing, especially for performers and dancers. Doug says, on the subject of sprung dance floors, they don't typically have springs, but use a layer of thin strips and a basket weave under the final wood floor. These floors are normally only found in theaters intended as a dance space only. They can be very expensive. Spaces such as Broadway theaters don't have them because the stage floor has to do many jobs, such as anchoring scenery, and may also have tracks cut into it. As to moldy lumber, this was another discussion about someone who wrote in who had been framing their own house, and the floor joists were covered with mold. The pictures reminded me of one of Mike Holmes's TV shows several years ago. They were working on a house in Toronto that had been used as an illicit grow house. After stripping everything to the structure, they called in a company that used crushed dry ice to ice blast all the wood. They claimed that this penetrated the wood fibers enough that the mold wouldn't come back. The other advantage of dry ice was that there's less to clean up, as the dry ice just evaporated. I have no idea if this lived up to the claims, but it was a great process to watch. I can imagine that was fun to watch, like clouds of dry ice sublimating as they blast off mold.
Yeah, just put on some club music.
That's gotta be weird timing in order to make that happen, because obviously you got to do it while the stuff's still frozen. It's got to be some weird equipment that they've got that could crush it and then store it and then shoot it out. I don't know. Have you ever heard of that before?
I have. I've also heard of like using walnut shells for similar things, especially like the restoration of industrial buildings in the former Rust Belt. Like, it seems to be the way that you get all the disgusting stuff off the wood timbers.
Is it like Van Dyke crystals? Do they like distill that? And do you know what that is?
What?
They soak the walnut husks, and then whatever comes out of it, I think they dry that, and the resulting thing is called Van Dyke crystals, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that's what it's called. But they use it to like restore old wood to make it, give it, or maybe it's to make new wood look like old wood. But it's a finish.
Never heard of this.
It's
We're going to have to dig into this.
Yeah.
Wow. What? Van Dyke crystals?
I think that's what it's called, yeah.
Huh. Have you heard of this, Rob?
No.
Yeah. I think he's making it up.
I probably am. It's probably some fever dream I had.
Should we take some questions?
Sure.
This is Josh from Tampa. Hello, FHB team. I live in Tampa, Florida. My 1996 built home has cathedral ceilings, and when I look at my roof line, I don't see any vents for the attic. The vent-looking accents over the garage and the front entry are fake. I can trace all the existing vents to plumbing drains. Is there a reason why it might be a bad idea to vent a roof in the south? Hurricanes, perhaps? Sorry for the non-New England-centric question.
Actually, I'm glad we have a non-New England-centric question. Even if it's not as familiar to us, we do need to branch out a bit. So this is good.
I totally agree. And I don't think that New England-centric is intentional. It's just intentional.
By osmosis. So there are two things that come to mind with this, and one is what he did talk about is hurricanes. I don't, obviously in our area we don't have as much familiarity with that stuff, but I do know we've watched some of those videos before where if there's any openings into the roof structure when wind hits it laterally, that it can blow the roof off. So not necessarily that in an older home, it's not necessarily intentionally built that way, but then also one of the big things down south that they have to worry about is any condensation on their air conditioning ducts in the attic, or leaks through their ceiling or air conditioning ducts, causing condensation and moisture buildup in their attics. So I
think that's the big thing, is that, I mean, a lot of the ventilation requirements in the code, I think, are really geared more toward cold climates where, you want to keep that roof deck dry. In the South, because the air is so hot and humid, at least in Florida where he is, the last thing you want to do is bring a lot of hot, humid air into the house because, one, you have the condensation problem you're talking about, but then you've got all that moisture you've got to strip out of the air in order to, condition the space. So probably the best solution there is not to vent, and I don't like using spray foam, but if you use closed cell spray foam on the whole roof deck and don't vent anything, just lock that up tight, then, it's going to be a lot easier to keep cool, and the air quality is probably going to be better, and you're not going to have rain in the house.
I think I observed a couple things here, and one is based on a trip I took to Miami-Dade County about a year after Hurricane Andrew hit. I was working for Pittsburgh Habitat for Humanity at the time, and they were asking for volunteer groups to go down to help with a very large rebuilding effort. And at least at that time, you were not allowed to put roof vents on structures for the reasons that Josh indicated. Because in a hurricane, and Matt said it too, any breach is going to potentially pressurize the roof and blow it off. So vents have a tendency to rip off in hurricane winds, so that's why they just don't put them on. I also observed on Josh's roof, it's so cut up that it would be very difficult to have soffit and ridge vents work effectively anyway because of its design. So I don't think it would work, and I would tell Josh just to not worry about it because, in his area, this is entirely normal for a good reason.
Yeah. Anytime you have any hip rafters on a roof, it becomes extremely difficult to vent it well. And all those valleys. But
he's got an interesting little roof detail called a junkin head, and I think it's Junkin, which is this little hip on that cuts the corner off of a normal gable shape, and that is definitely going to screw up how at least that part of the roof vents because it doesn't go to the ridge, right? It's terminated.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, if there are any issues with a house like that, the main things you want to do is seal the ductwork if there is any in the attic, which there likely is in Florida. Seal the ductwork up really well, insulate the ductwork, and do a really good job of air sealing your ceiling plane in the house to prevent the moisture load in that attic.
I don't know how stuff doesn't rot with every precaution in the climate that Chris is in. I mean, in the summertime in Tampa, it has got to be 90% humidity, like 99% of the time.
Yeah, and they have their attics are a lot like our basements in that the dew point is really hard to avoid in when you've got that much moisture buildup in the attic.
Yeah, so keep it out.
Yeah, keep it out is the
spray foam. Those shingles will get nice and hot and keep that deck nice and dry.
You know, that's a good point too. Is that one of the criticisms of unvented roofs in the South is the claim that, you know, you'll have a shorter life on your roofing materials because you're not cooling off the deck. But I think that it's been found that the amount of cooling on those roof decks from venting, especially in a hot climate like that, is not significant enough to make that big of a difference on the roofing materials.
Yeah, it's pretty negligible. Really, the color of the roofing material itself has a much bigger impact than the venting does.
I've always told people in virtually every climate to use light-colored roofing because it does last a lot longer, but I understand people's hesitation in places like Florida because it's going to turn into a black moldy mess, right? If you have dark-colored shingles, the mold and algae are obscured, but if you have light-colored roofing, immediately you start to see these streaks of black, and that's the mold and algae that's growing on the roof, and it looks bad. So, I mean, there's no good solution except to put some other kind of roofing material other than asphalt shingles. Josh goes on to say, I grew up outside Chicago and spent 12 years in coastal California. I think all the homes I lived in had vents in the attic to circulate air. I'd gladly trade a little less efficiency heating for the 4 days a year that we heat it for some cooling savings in the 8 months it's hot up there. It seems like a reasonable trade-off. Yeah, I would stay away from the roof venting, Josh. And boy, you can do something else with the time you were going to spend cutting open your roof and making a mess.
Mm-hmm.
This next question comes from Chris. Dear FHB podcast, I was visiting my mom recently and noticed her back door was rotting/rusting at the bottom and needs to be replaced. It's a north-facing door that receives almost no direct sunlight. It's shaded to the east by a fence and to the west by the wing of the house. She lives around central Florida, so there's never any snow. Would it be better to add a storm door to keep rain from hitting the sill of the doorway, or would it be better to not have one to allow for airflow? Also, for the new door, I assume a fiberglass door is best. Thanks again, Chris. Who wants to go first?
I think the first thing I'd want to do is inspect the sill and see if there's any damage down there. I mean, I don't know what his foundation is, if it's just slab on grade or does he have a crawl space, other joists, I don't know. But you want to check to see if that's all okay before you tackle the door. Make sure there's, like a pan in there. Make sure it's flashed.
Yeah.
And then, the door, I mean, I don't know. I mean, go with whatever kind of door you like. I mean, if you could certainly keep a wood door in there, it may just take more maintenance. But
I think you're wrong. I think a fiberglass door is an ideal solution, especially for this climate. I mean, they don't rot. He's got a steel door because he describes it as rusting, right? So,
yeah, that's what I wasn't sure about on that. He said rusting and rotting. Yeah,
and maybe the jambs are probably rotting, and the door slab is probably what's rusting. And people don't realize it, but you got to paint your steel doors pretty regularly. I paint mine every couple years to keep them from rotting away. And once you let them get so that there is red rust, it's very hard to stop that, right? Because it just keeps coming back. So when I was selling doors, I would tell people, if you have an exposed location, the best thing you can do is put a little porch roof or some kind of overhang over the door to shield it from the elements. He told me that his mom's house has 2-foot overhangs, and the house is a single story, so that's probably doing that job there as best it can, and there's not going to be enough room to add more porch roofs. So I think his best solution is a fiberglass door. Some people used to put on screen and storm doors, especially in our place, but, you're not going to do that in Florida, right? Maybe you are, but you never open the door anyway because it's too hot, right? In New England, you can open your front door and have the screen door in there and you get some reasonable cooling. But in Florida, you want to keep that outside air outside.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rob? Do you have a fiberglass door?
I think I'm kind of leaning towards what you were talking about, Patrick. I was like, at first, like we keep getting these non-New England questions, which is great. But my first inclination is, oh, well, I'm going to add a storm door because it's going to help me with comfort and energy. But in a climate like that, especially if you're not used to having a storm door, just put a durable door in there or durable installation of it, or more durable door.
I think Matt's suggestion, frankly, it's something I hadn't considered, is you're going to need to make sure the framing around this door is not compromised from it leaking, right? And, in Tampa, he's in Central Florida, but still, you get, wind-driven rain, and it's going to make a mess in there, right?
Yeah.
So what's your preferred pan flashing method, Matt?
I don't know that I have a preferred method, but probably metal. But I would back it up, probably some kind of Grace, type water shield down first, and then a metal pan flashing on top of that. Just sort of, belt and suspenders type approach.
And then how do you flash the door to the opening on the sides and top?
How to flash the door to the opening?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you may have to pull back some siding for that. I don't know.
At a minimum, you're going to have to take the casing off the door, right? And then, tape the jamb to the existing opening. I think at a minimum, it would be better if you could integrate it into the WRB behind the siding.
Yeah.
There's so much stucco in Florida that that complicates fixing anything, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't for you, Matt, though, because you like to stucco things.
Yeah. It's not bad.
You got anything to add to this, Jeff?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it could potentially be a block foundation or a block structure in Central Florida.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you have a fiberglass entry doors in your house, Jeff?
No, wood in the front and steel in the garage.
I think fiberglass doors are, an amazing problem solver. And if you get the right one, it really, really looks like wood, especially if you're good at finishing. I mean, it's the best of both worlds. You get the good looks and the, really long-term durability.
Yeah.
Okay, this next question. Hello, FHB podcast. Love the show and look forward to tuning in each week. In 2012, I built my my tiny house of 150 square feet and have been living it full-time ever since. While I've enjoyed it immensely, it was always a stepping stone to a more traditional home. Well, the time has come to start making plans for my future house, having closed on 11 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. This will be my retirement home. I'm 36. For me and my partner, so I'd like the floor plan where most things are on the main floor. I'm aiming for a house with a master bedroom, a small guest room, a home office, and other basic rooms. I've pored over floor plans, toured many homes in person, but most of what is available is either new construction with huge square footage or an utter lack of design sense, or older small homes that lack storage and open floor plans. The real problem is they are all bigger than my current home, so it's hard to determine what I want with regard to square footage and design/layout. How would the FHB team suggest I go about right-sizing my future house? So have you guys taken a look at this gentleman's building lot?
Yes.
What do you think, Rob?
I'd live there. It looks nice.
This is Ryan, and he's got a nice flat lot looking at the mountains, and that's one of my favorite parts of the country, I gotta say. So I think he's chosen wisely. And his tiny house is adorable. It's got some really good detail.
So as far as finding, I can see how it can be challenging, especially since our country, our society is obsessed with more extravagant houses but at the same time, the tiny house and small home concept has seemed to have, gotten some good foothold in our media in recent years. But as far as trying to find inspiration, I just did a quick search of our site because since 2012 or 2013, the annual Houses Awards that we did featured a small home. And one of the first ones we featured was this little yellowish green house. It was like, I don't know if it was an accessory dwelling or not, but it was in Oregon on this narrow lot. And it's only 800 square feet. And it's got some really beautiful details in it. But so I just started searching around and found probably a good half dozen to a dozen other examples of really compact houses, less than 1,000 square feet, that we featured over the past 10, 15 years. And it's kind of inspired me to actually I'm going to create a collection on the website probably before this podcast airs of all those small home resources. So we'll put a link on the page for him to get some inspiration there. But, when it comes to small houses, though, it's all about getting the best use of your space, as I'm sure he's learned living in a tiny house. And so really the whole Not So Big House series, I mean, it's been around for years and years now, but Sarah Suzanka was onto something with focusing on the comfort and utility of a space instead of using the standard sort of real estate model of, well, how many square feet and how many of these rooms does it have? A lot of times rooms can serve multiple purposes or have combined with other rooms to save space. So I don't know. Hopefully, if he can find some good inspiration in that collection that I'm going to build.
Yeah. What do you think, Matt?
I don't know. What does his partner want, for one? Like, it's not just a decision for him, but also, I mean, if you want to start out small, I think I would start out with a smaller house and just design something that could be easily added onto, rather than like try to decide, what I want for the rest of my life at 36, because your needs are going to change. So, what you need now or what you like now might not be what you want or need at 50, and so that would probably be my main advice. But I don't know, maybe, once things calm down and you can go hang out at some Airbnbs, check out a bunch of houses that you like and see, hang out there for a week or two and just get a sense of, what different houses can offer you.
What do you think, Mr. Junior Executive Mansion?
I mean, the idea of working with just a paper models, like cut out some spaces and kind of put them together almost like you're doing a floor, like you're doing a room layout, but do it as a floor plan layout, and see what you can come up with that way. And then, look at old houses, because they were small and they were fairly efficient because they had to be.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent suggestion. So when my wife and I added the second story to our house in Stowe, Vermont, that's where we started with, was a corrugated cardboard model, complete with our furnishings and bath fixtures and little tiny Patrick and Carol that would move through the spaces to see if they would work. And it was extremely helpful. And especially someone who's used to thinking in 3 dimensions, or not used to thinking in 3 dimensions, it's really helpful to look in the space physically. I would also look to Habitat for Humanity for inspiration on efficient small floor plans, because generally speaking, the biggest Habitat houses are 1,200-1,400 square feet. And oftentimes even a house that big has got 3 or 4 bedrooms. So I think that's another good solution. That's like these folks have had a chance to refine the designs now for 30, 40 years, and they make a lot of sense in many cases. Additionally, so one time I went to the Solar Decathlon. It was still being held in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. The University of Appalachia was one of the competitors, and they're in Boone, North Carolina, which is very close to where this gentleman is looking to build. And they had an amazing little house, and I would look, and it was had a vernacular quality. And I always think that you should look to the regional architectural styles for clues on how to build your own home, right? Because a lot of these things have been figured out through successes and failures of previous designs. So I think that's a really valuable thing to do. and they look great, as others have suggested, right? It's like the houses had more personality because they had to work well.
Yeah.
The house that the University of Appalachia entered in that solar decathlon, and I want to say that was probably 2010, 12. But it was a series of smaller spaces connected by breezeways, which I thought was pretty freaking cool. It used like siding that was traditional for the area too. It was like that kind of Adirondack style that's got natural edges, and I remember there being bark left on some of the stuff, and Barbara would tell us not to do that, but it sure looked cool.
Yeah.
What do you think about living in a tiny home and then deciding that it's too small and you want a bigger house? I've heard that over and over again, that it's a very temporary thing for folks. They decide that living 150 or 120 square feet is just really not big enough.
Yeah, I watch all those tiny house shows, and there's a whole lot of things that they gloss over that you need to deal with when you're living in a house long term. And sometimes I wonder why. I mean, I understand the mystique of it, but sometimes I wonder why people just don't go with a straight up mobile home, because you could probably buy a used mobile home for a hell of a lot cheaper than you could buy some of those fancy custom built tiny houses. But at the same time, it's certainly an exercise in living within your means. And I could see the draw of living mortgage free while you save money to maybe move into a slightly bigger place someday. But to Matt's point earlier, though, I like the idea. I've always thought about this of like building a really compact structure with the thought that you would expand it rather than building some temporary thing that you're going to replace with something else.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a great suggestion. And some like architectural styles lend themselves to additions better than others, right? In New England, we see capes that grow off the gable end oftentimes, or they can be, an L off the back, so like ranch houses with hip roofs and stuff, I think that's way harder to make work with, an addition, right?
Yeah. Plus, he's got 11 acres, he said. So, I mean, he could easily plan his site so that he leaves room in his landscape for a bump out off one side or the other.
I think it would be worth talking to either local builders or, perhaps engineers in the area too, to talk about soil conditions and well water, because oftentimes those considerations and driveway access are going to have a huge impact on your the size and location of the house that you build on the lot, right? Your well and septic system need to be on opposite ends of the lot. And oftentimes that guides, the house placement, and in turn the placement designs the shape of the house. So, it's not just about the house. It's about the infrastructure you need to live in a house.
Yeah.
Good choice, though, where it is, I got to say. You guys ever been there?
Yeah.
I've passed through that area. It's not too far from where I lived in Virginia.
Cool.
All right, our next question comes from Charles. Charles writes, "Hey, FHB crew. My wife and I bought our first home 6 months ago." Well, congratulations, Charles. And I'm surprised I'm already tackling a project this intimidating. As a listener, I never thought I would come across a project worthy of emailing in about. This small hall section used to have a parquet floor that connected 3 other types of flooring. Nothing matched. In an effort to get matching floors, we ripped this up to find that the underlayment was 5/8 inch thick particle board. When we started to rip up the parquet, it ripped up the particle board with it. We ended up ripping all the particle board out of that area and put down 5/8 inch thick OSB as a new underlayment. The particle board did not come up without a fight and left me with jagged edges, which left small gaps on 2 sides of the OSB. My first question is, how do I fill these gaps? I have self-leveling floor leveler, but after watching some YouTube videos, it seems too viscous, and I fear it would just seep under the OSB and cause bigger problems. Doesn't he mean it would be not viscous enough and it would just run under I think that's what he means, right? My next question is about removing a pitch in the floor. As you can see, my dog is showing you the pitch is, and the high spots run right over the top of the main beam, excuse me. If I go into the basement, I can see that this pitched area sits directly above the main girder running the length of the house. What is the best way to remove this pitch? I'm going to call it a hump. Should I just take a belt sander to it until it is flat? Listening to you guys has been great. I'm so glad I found your podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Awesome. What a great question.
So before we address this question, I think that's the first time I've ever seen someone use a dog as a measurement tool.
It's some kind of Springer Spaniel, isn't it?
It looks like.
See, what's this gentleman's name? I forget.
So
Charles,
yeah.
Dealing with messy subfloors, if you've got the room, I would say you build it up with tapered material, but it doesn't look like he's got a whole lot of room. I mean, honestly, I would just cut all that stuff right out of there and deal with it at the framing level.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not worth the fuss to try to deal with it on top when you have such thin materials trying to meet each other at unusual edges and angles. If he tears that all out, then he can sister up, put wedges, shims, cut back, whatever he needs to do to the framing to get it to match up with the height of the adjacent materials. That's what I would do.
So you'd plane down the top of the joist?
Sure. Plane, belt sand, whatever it takes.
220, 221.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably just add like a 1/4 inch shim on that side, and then, that'll lift that up.
Except it's not going to plane out with the rest of the flooring surrounding it. So let's try and explain this to folks who are listening and don't have the pictures we do. So it's a tiny hallway. It looks like it's 4x4, right?
Mm-hmm.
And off of there are 3 doorways, and this thing is a hump that connects all these different spaces. So if you make the lower parts match the high part, you're going to have to do it throughout the entire rooms, right? So I think Rob's on the right track. You need to lower the high spot.
Maybe. The thing is, I can't really tell what's going on. So he's got a crack on one end, but it's only sort of high on one corner.
Yeah, and my guess is that's directly below, or the main girder is directly below that spot.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused why the joists have bowed on either side of the main girder. And my suspicion is it's because these walls that are, on both sides of this main girder forming this hallway don't have any bearing below them. So their additional weight is bowing these joists. And if this house is it's clearly been there a while based on the photograph, so it's unlikely to fall down, but this isn't usually what happens, right? Usually the main girder is under, a bearing wall in the center of the house. And, it's kind of an unusual scenario in that regard. I want to kind of take a stab at some of the other questions he had. So he mentioned he had difficulty getting the edges of the particle board cut square, and I had no doubt. But this is a great opportunity to buy the power tool that you're going to find so much use for, an oscillating multi-tool, and it allows you to cut things in place. And once you get proficient with it, it allows you to cut straight in place. And it's super handy for cutting out sections of subfloor like this and getting good edges so you can make square pieces to match up. So I would buy one of those at your earliest opportunity. You'll be amazed at how quickly it becomes a part of your regular remodeling lexicon.
Yeah, when I see something like that, Patrick, the first thing that I start thinking about is what tool can I use to get this job done. And and before those things came along, a lot of demolition jobs were a big hassle. And if you're cutting straight with oscillating multi-tool, the one big tip to give people is to use a straight scrap of wood as a guide. Whether you hold it in place or screw it down, you can get a nice perfect cut if you just put the blade flush against a piece of wood as your guide.
There is a great article written by Kevin Ireton, the former editor of Fine Homebuilding magazine, on oscillating multi-tool techniques, and we'll put that on a podcast page. That is required reading for anyone who has one of these tools, because I bet even if you've had it for years, you're going to learn some ways to use it that you hadn't thought of before. It's really a good piece. I think everyone has touched on this fix here is to lower the floor joist some, and a cheap power planer, and expect to destroy some blades when you hit nails and stuff. But I think that's going to be the way to take the hump out of the floor. I think trying to make to patch it and match it up is going to be way more difficult. Charles sent me some photos that I don't know that you guys saw. I put it in the podcast folder, but one thing that really worries me, and it wasn't even related to his question, is in the basement I see a piece of Romex wire nutted to what looks like pieces of knob and tube wiring, and that is a definite no-no. I would definitely, and looks like there's a whole bunch of other weird electrical things going on in this basement. I think he really needs to have an electrician come in here and surmise what's going on, because it looks like it's been cobbled together by someone who wasn't exactly qualified to be making electrical repairs and running new circuitry. Did you guys notice that?
No, but as I brought up one of the last podcasts, it's like that's one of the things that is worth it to spend the money on for a professional. I mean, there's a lot of projects you can do yourself, but if you're just getting into remodeling for the first time yourself, or you're not really familiar with wiring, trial and error for wiring is not a good idea. So,
right, Matt?
Yeah, don't do that.
This place, I mean, there's wires hanging down. It just looks completely butchered. I would want someone to redo all of it, but it's going to be expensive, I guarantee. So sorry for that good news, Charles. It's not what you wanted to hear. His ultimate plan is to put click lock flooring on top of this subfloor, and I would describe this as not very tolerant of out of level conditions. I've tried to put this down on wonky floors, and it's a mistake. Don't do it. Make sure your floor is perfectly level before you try and use one of these products.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the few floors in my house that I actually jacked up to try to get more level. My 1870s house was the kitchen, because we did a click flooring in there, because I think they said it was something like a quarter or an eighth of an inch and 10 feet. They wanted it to be within level. And I can tell you most rooms in my house are not in the tolerance level.
Yeah.
And the annoying thing is that it'll work and you'll be able to get it together and the thing will look great, but when you walk on it, it's going to be spongy underneath, and it's just really bad scene. It's disconcerting, and like your guests are going to be like, am I going to fall through the floor here?
It'll feel like one of those dance floors we were talking about earlier.
So have you successfully redone all the wiring in your house, Matt?
No, I've done quite a bit. There's a lot of the original like armored cable in the house, and I have no intention of going in and removing all of that. Really, I think in order to probably get at everything, I'd probably have to, remove a lot of drywall, and, a lot of the boxes themselves are undersized, like the actual, so like it's hard to get new devices in a lot of those things. Like as I go, putting GFCIs in places where they should be.
Yeah. I'm
having to replace a lot of boxes. So yeah, it's tedious.
So when you use old work boxes, do you have a favorite? Like, is your house plaster or drywall for starters? And what is your favorite old work box?
Yeah, it's all drywall. Really, it depends on what I'm going into. If I'm going back into, if I'm still connecting the old armored cable, then I'm using metal boxes for that. So that usually requires a little bit more work to get that fit in right.
And it's difficult because the connectors for BX cable have to be on the outside, or do you use the boxes with the internal clamps?
Yeah, most of them, the ones that I've done so far have all been on the outside. So it's tedious.
That means you're opening walls to put those in, right? I mean, there's no choice.
pulling the cables, and then running them into the box, and then
Putting the
trying to
nut
carefully put the box back in. It's a lot of fiddling.
That's fussy work, and it has to be right. I kind of like it because I like the problem solving aspect of old electrical work, but it takes some experience, because knowing what product to use when is a huge plus. I like the plastic boxes with the little wings for drywall. I think they work pretty good. But I like different styles for plaster, because the little the wall is too thick with plaster to use those plastic boxes with the little wings, because it can be an inch thick or more even.
Yep.
So, and they just don't work that way.
Yep.
Jeff, what would you do with this wonky floor?
I think Rob's got it right. You got to get down to the down to the framing.
But how do you plane all the way to the wall? That's the one thing. I mean, like
Chisels.
Chisels,
Hammer
yeah.
and chisel. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like any of these jobs, when you're working in tight spaces and existing conditions, it's usually a combination of tools to get the job done. And so, if you had a belt sander, you might be able to get it sideways against the wall pretty close, and just finish up that last little bit with a chisel. But yeah, it's always so tempting to not go deeper into a job, because you've already done some invasive work. But oftentimes it's just so much easier to start from scratch than it is to work over existing materials that are not in the best condition.
Yeah, can you imagine what his wife says when she sees this like huge hole in the floor? Most people are just like, they can't visualize this ever coming back together, and I can imagine that's a little stressful, right? And especially a hallway where you need to use it to get to other parts of the house, right? So for a day or two, you're like temporarily covering this hole to the basement with plywood and trying to go about your daily life.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually that's, you make a good point. That's one of the biggest things that I take for granted nowadays, is how overwhelming, if you haven't seen something in those conditions before, it can be for you or your family members to think of the idea of cutting a giant hole anywhere in your house. It just doesn't seem like a good idea, but a big hole is just as easy to patch as a small hole. So sometimes you just got to make the big hole.
I'm very lucky, Carol and I met, on Habitat construction sites where we were rehabbing really screwed up old houses. So, she got used to seeing very invasive repairs very early on in our relationship. So I'm sure there were things that, had we not had that shared experience, she would have lost her mind when she saw me like cutting a house apart, right?
Yeah, my wife still thinks that I take things too far sometimes. She thinks that I like to overcomplicate projects.
I think she's right.
But sometimes it's just hard to stop, halfway there, right? So
I can tell you the day that we took the roof off our house in Stowe, and I was looking out over the expanse of floor with walls up and nothing over it, I was like, oh my God, I made a huge mistake. We had a house that was entirely livable, and now I just took the top completely off of it.
We have to post some pictures of that. In fact, have you ever done a blog post or anything on the website about it? You really should, Patrick, because honestly, that's one of the few types of projects that I don't know if I would ever have the guts to do, to tear the entire house off of the roof off of a house that I'm actually living in.
Rob, I was a lot younger then. I don't know that I would have the courage to do that again. I wasn't very smart.
Yeah, it worked out though, right?
Yeah, it did. It took a long time. And, one evening this was shortly after we started the project. And we had a bunch of friends over who were camping in the backyard helping us. And as my wife's aunt and uncle said, you guys have good friends. And that is entirely true. But it started pouring. It was just pouring, and rain was dripping on our heads while we were sleeping on this air mattress in the living room. And I was just like, what the heck have we done? Why are we doing this? And it was weird because we had, at this point, had, you know, the second story walls, which were, you know, 3 foot tall, and in the center of them was this huge window opening, and the idea was, and it had a cross gable roof, right? So above this big window opening was going to be a gable, and then the main gable went, you know, east to west. And we had this big thunderstorm, and the wind was blowing from the north, which it never did, and it was just pouring in this window, and put some plastic over that window and went back to bed. And I was so tired, I actually didn't have any trouble falling back asleep after climbing up in this hole and then stapling plastic over the window. And my neighbors could actually hear me with the hammer tacker putting plastic over the window. And he stopped the next morning and said, so did you guys get wet last night?
Well, you know, one of the things that it gives me hope for projects like this nowadays, because obviously when you're doing any exterior job that penetrates your house temporarily, especially in a rainy climate, it's just the most stressful possible remodeling situation you could be in. And but the great thing is nowadays we have so many affordable, more durable, waterproof materials. I mean, I would actually spend the extra money on buying like some weather barrier rather than using polyethylene or a tarp, because tarps are notoriously not waterproof to temporarily patch up stuff like that.
I used a technique that I first saw in Fine Homebuilding, actually, which was to get a tarp and roll it up like a Venetian blind, right? When you want to work, and then at the end of the day, you just untie it from the ridge and pull it down, right? And I did the same thing on my barn roof because I didn't want the OSB to get soaked as I was, you know, shingling it, and it works great. And you just have to. You just have to plan that it's going to rain. And remodelers who take on attic levels or dormer additions and stuff, like, who don't have a good plan for this, they get burned. You know, I have seen it. And you can have a great forecast, but in many parts of the country, it can still rain.
Definitely.
Just get ready to have a downpour while you're building, because it can happen, and the consequences are dire when you're working on someone's house.
Yeah.
Whew, that was fun. You guys have anything to add?
No.
Nope.
So I was kind of sad you weren't on when we recorded last time, Matt, but you know, our #1 commenter on the YouTube podcast page, Fancy?
Yeah, Fancy.
Yeah. So, you know, Fancy had come around last week. I don't know if you had noticed that.
I did notice that.
Do you remember what he said exactly? I
can't remember exactly what he said, but I did respond to it. I said, I need that, like, my brain exploded emoji.
and he usually, what is his comment? And
tell us Suzanne Summers.
Yes.
Yeah. It's fantastic. I was worried if he doesn't comment, I'm worried that he died of the COVID.
But so then he said something different, and I think that was episode 243, I want to say. Mm-hmm. He said what? I forget what he said, but it was a different comment. He was very supportive, but now he's back to Suzanne Summers. So I don't know if we did really good that week that he commented, or he was just trying to see if we were paying attention, but we are.
Yeah. I hope he's doing well. Or she.
Me too.
We don't know what it is.
It's great. As far as trolls go, it's one of the nicest ones you could hope to have, right?
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Matt, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Once again, folks, thanks so much for listening. Happy building, and stay safe, everybody.